Hello, I'm Ryan Lightfoot-Amanoff of Chelsea Financial Services, and today I'm joined by Charlie Dutton, manager of the 91 Asia Pacific Franchise Funds. Charlie, thank you very much for your time today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Ryan.
Now, in your fund, what are sort of key themes in the region that you're looking at, and how are you implementing those in the portfolio?
Sure. Well, as an approach, we like to look at stocks which we believe aren't cyclical, and we're looking at structural growth coming through. So there are kind of three key themes that we look at, which is within healthcare, consumer, and IT. And those are the key areas which we see coming through from a kind of quality philosophy perspective. And so when you're looking at IT as an example, the basic theme that we're looking for there is if you believe the world is going to need greater computing power going forward, which I think is a given, let's look at what can provide that computing power. So the likes of your Samsung, the likes of your TSMC, but also looking at the specific software stocks which are coming through. So a lot of the trends that we've seen occur in Europe and the US are now beginning to occur, particularly in China and North Asia. And that's where we have a lot of our exposure. And the same could be said within your branded consumer names. Again, those names which have that great pricing power, particularly in an inflationary environment that we're going into. And then finally, within the healthcare sector, which is obviously an evolving sector, and you're going to have a huge amount of spend coming forward, particularly when you look at the aging population within China and making sure that we have the correct exposure within that different sector as well.
And you mentioned China a couple of times in the answer. It's the biggest country in the region, but one that's got its sort of fair share of challenges from sort of geopolitics to regulations.
Sure.
What would you say to those who feel the country is sort of simply uninvestable in this climate?
It's obviously China has been through quite a move over the last 12 months. And I think I'm in a relatively lucky position in the sense that I'm running an Asian fund. China is a large part of Asia, and therefore that's part of my investable universe. I think if you're a global investor and you've got to look at global asset allocation and you're deciding should I be in Europe or the US or China, then that becomes a more difficult decision. What I can say is from a bottom-up perspective and looking at the individual stock opportunities, when you're looking at a country whose economy is going to be as large as the US is in the coming number of years, looking at the opportunity set which is available within China, I think there are some extraordinarily exciting opportunities within that. You have to be very mindful, obviously, with regards to corporate governance, what's happening with regards to regulation, but I don't see it as uninvestable. And in fact, what we've seen in the last 3, 6, 12 months, the opportunity set which is now being given to you in China at the valuations that are being given is incredibly exciting.
And thinking more broad specs, rising oil prices has been a real theme of this year. But what's the impact in the region, the Asian region? There's a bit of a mixture between some who are potentially beneficiaries from that and those countries that are sort of harmed from it. What are you doing in the fund? What are you seeing?
Again, we're relatively fortunate with the approach of the fund because we take this pure quality approach. We don't really invest in companies which are cyclical in nature or who have massive exposure to input prices. The point being that we have stocks which we believe have ultimate pricing power. Therefore, irrespective of the input costs, they're able to price that through to the end customer, to the end client. What I would say from a more generic basis is obviously those countries who aren't oil producers and those countries who are very dependent on oil imports or energy imports are going to see a significant spike in their inflation going forward. And of concern, I think, with that, and again, it comes back to the type of exposure you want to look for, would be within India, where obviously they are a significant energy importer. They do have a history of running quite high inflation. And I think that energy input costs are going to go up significantly, and that will feed through to food price inflation. And obviously, you're then going to have some reaction from central banks in order to control that. It doesn't obviously mean that there aren't great opportunities in India because there are still those stocks which have the ability to pass on that pricing pressure. And you'll see that they can actually have considerable earnings upside on the back of that.
And one of the themes we've seen over the last couple of years is what we're calling the Great Resignation, lots of people dropping out of the workforce or taking early retirement. Has this theme come across to Asia at all? And are there fears that the wage inflation caused by this is going to come through as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting point, Ryan. And we have seen this incredible turnover that you're referring to in Europe and the US with regards to the Great Resignation and how people perceive their opportunities at work and how they want to take the work from home to the next level. We're certainly not seeing it to the same extent in Asia, and it's also quite country specific. So some of the ASEAN countries, your Singapores, your Malaysias, your Thailands, have seen quite a significant uplift in the turnover of employment and some wage inflation coming through. Within India and China, it's much less so. But I think this is a general theme that we're seeing in terms of employers' rights and benefits, which should be occurring as you get an uplift in economic growth. And that's suddenly coming through. So I'm not sure whether it's directly related to the Great Resignation or whether it's actually just an improvement in employee benefits.
And how long do you or maybe your companies expect some of the supply chain disruptions to last? And how is that impacting the portfolio's holdings? It's been, again, another big theme over the last couple of years. Asia is known as sort of the workshop of the world.
Sure.
How are you expecting that to sort of match up with some of the supply chain issues? Are they starting to ease, or are we seeing further issues with some of the lockdowns we're seeing now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the beginning of the year, we were very hopeful that we were seeing a significant improvement in supply chain issues. Certainly, when you look at it, it makes you realize how complex global supply chains have become, and I think you're going to see localization of that supply network going forward. All the headlines you've seen around particularly the semiconductor sector and getting chips for the auto sector has been very significant. Again, it comes back to this idea that if you've got significant pricing power, the likes of your Samsungs or your TSMCs or your ASMLs have actually managed to manage this situation very successfully. So beginning of the year, we were very hopeful that the supply chain disruption was just that. It was a short-term disruption. What we have seen, obviously, in the last few weeks and last month, and I think it's going to continue for the next couple of months, is the very significant lockdowns which are occurring in China. And it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. Personally, I think you're going to see that there's going to be this initial significant lockdown, a realization that it's having very, very harsh economic impacts. And then there'll be the realization that actually they need to open up the economy because the impact of the economic lockdown is actually probably more severe than the lockdown for health reasons.
Well, Charlie, that's been really interesting. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thank you.
And if you'd like to find out more about the 91 Asia Pacific franchise funds, please visit our website, chelseafs.co.uk. And for more from our video series, please don't forget to like and subscribe below.